Okay, so this is going to be our intro to Node lecture. And what we're going to do from this lecture in terms of our workshop is we're going to build a Node shell. So what you have to, before you build the Node shell, you have to understand how Node works. And so a couple of things that you should be aware of. And, I have some slides here, but I want to actually get to kind of the meat and potatoes of this stuff. Just a sort of a little bit of a brief, some brief information about Node that, we're used to running JavaScript in browsers. So we, write our JavaScript. We ended up doing our game of life. That ends up running inside the Chrome browser. It turns out that the Chrome browser ends up using this V8 engine that acts as the engine or the interpreter for Node. And when we end up thinking about, how that works, what we're going to do when we end up writing Node on the server, what ends up happening is that we end up, let me rephrase that. When we end up running JavaScript that's going to run on the server, we're running it with Node, and Node ends up becoming this runtime environment for us. I guess the same way we could say that Chrome is a runtime environment when we end up running it on the browser. So Node is our runtime environment, and the V8 engine is still the one that's doing the work with Node, but Node is the environment where the code ends up running. It ends up running in the environment. That environment gives us access to some libraries. It gives us the ability to do things that we could never end up doing on the client for any number of reasons. So it's the same old JavaScript, whether it's on the client or the server, but what we have access to on the client and on the server are very different. So for instance, on the client, you have access to the DOM. There's no such thing as a DOM on the server, but on the server, you have things like access to resources where you could end up loading a file or making a database call or making another HTTP request in the background or that sort of thing. So what I want to do here, and this is a fairly easy thing to take a look at, I'm going to make a directory. I'm going to call it Node Intro. I'm going to cd into that directory. One thing that you can do if you have Node installed is that you're able to create a Node REPL, which basically if you type Node, you're in a Node REPL and you can write Node. So if Node is just JavaScript, if I write x equals 99, right, the reason why everything that you do in a REPL gives you a return object, and nothing is returned from this statement running. If I look at x, I see x is 99. If I say x plus equals 1, I end up getting 100 back, right? So again, you could run this. This is just JavaScript that's running. What I really want to do here is to quit out of this, and let me open up my editor here, and we're going to actually write some Node. So if I go over here and I end up creating a file called foo.js, let me make this bigger, and I can run this. I can tell Node to run this file. I can say, Node, I want you to run this file, and again, it's the V8 engine that's going to end up running this. But I could go over here and I could say console.log hello world. So this is the hello world version from Node. And if I went back over here and I said node foo.js, I would see hello world pop up. And look, any JavaScript is valid here. There are some things that you have on the client and on the server. So some of these things that have been, I guess you could say, ported over, I could do is set timeout. And I could call a function in 1 second. I could say console.log hello again. If I go back here and I run this, it's going to take a second and it'll end up running this command, okay? Not all that interesting here. What can we do here? Well, there's a number of things that we can do. We could find out what our current directory is, let's say. So one thing we could do here is when node ends up running, there's a special variable called directory name. And if we run this, we can see that that's our current directory. Now, I'll show you something that is kind of cool, that you have the ability to pull in other node modules. Now, what you could do is you could, those modules are up on a place called NPM, or at least Node Package Manager. So if we do a search for NPM, these are packages that have been published. And, you can see some of the ones that come up here. We're going to look at Express. So Express is a very popular package. Bower is pretty popular. So just for kicks, I'm going to look for a file called Chalk. Chalk is a node module that lets you spit out some text and color about how to use Chalk. So and we could try to use Chalk by going to get the right window open here. So if we went over here and we decided we were going to use Chalk, and we said something like Chalk equals required Chalk. So unlike JavaScript in the browser, Node works with a module system, and it's a require system, so that with JavaScript, if you put a bunch of JavaScript files and you loaded them in the browser, unless you structure them in a certain way, any function that you have there is basically going to be sitting inside of what would be a global namespace, which is really not a great thing to have. It doesn't really, you have to be very judicious about making things modular. But if I went to run this, I'd get an error. I would say, hey, look, this is great, but I can't find this Chalk module. Well, one thing we can do here is we could say npm install Chalk. So npm install npm is a node package manager. You've used it before. And we can install Chalk. And that's fine, and it'll work, but the question is, where did it end up installing it? Well, one thing that you often want to do is that you want other people to use your projects. For instance, you made an Express project, you might want to clone it, and you want people to use it. If someone was to go in here and we put this up on GitHub, and someone went to grab it, they would get the same error we got, and they'd have to fish through the code to see why, in fact, they were getting these errors that Chalk wasn't installed, again, assuming they didn't have it installed. So what we could do, instead of installing it the way that we installed it, we could install Chalk, and it's not going to quite work the way that I want to. I'm going to do save here. And I'm just going to take a look here. Nothing really has changed. So there's a special file that your node projects have, which is a package JSON file. And this file is pretty important because what it tells you is what packages you ended up installing, so someone else could go ahead and install them. So if you don't have a package JSON file, what you could do is you say npm init. And this will go, and we could just use the defaults. And it'll end up creating a node file. If I go back here and I look at this, here's my package file. And it still doesn't have my dependencies here, my dependency, I should say, which is Chalk. So I'm going to say npm install. I'm going to do this for the third time. And again, this goes up to the node package manager and ends up grabbing these files. And I know that sounds like a crappy explanation. I guess the better answer would be wherever this is hosted, npm JS This is like a public repository here. And we can go over here and say npm install chalk save. And if we went back here, we would see that chalk was installed, and we even get a version, which will give some indication of what version we're looking for here. Now at this point, we could run our node foo.js, and that'll work okay. But let's actually output something. Let's try chalk blue. Okay. So what's interesting is that this will actually give you colored text, but you still need to do console.log. So now we've got this in blue. We could do this in red. Console red, console log. And if we do that, this will be red. Now, I want to show you a couple of other tricks that you could actually use here. There's another package called NodeMon. And what NodeMon does is that when you end up making changes to your scripts, in other words, if you ended up loading foo.js and you end up changing foo.js, it will automatically reload it, which is kind of a nice thing. So now I have it installed globally, and it's actually one of those things that's recommended that you install globally. If you ever want to install it globally, we're going to say npm install nodemon.-g, which is global. So again, this is loading in this is the node runtime environment. This is the V8 engine that's basically the interpreter that's running this. And again, because it's running on the server, we've got access to libraries that can do a lot more things, which I'll show you in a little bit. So I want to also introduce you to asynchronicity. So if I go over here and I say, instead of node, I say nodemon foo.js. Not only does it run, but every time that I would go over here, and you can see on the bottom, if I was to go over here and say green, it'll run again. You know that there's a magenta. Again, this is going to work just like your regular JavaScript files will work. So in other words, if I wanted to create a function over here called log, I could do that. I could pass it a message and move this up here. And if I went over here, put in our message, and I'll say log hello. And you could do all kinds of things here if you wanted to. We could pass in let's say a color, and we could even say that the color is optional. We'll put it as a second parameter. And we've seen this before. I'll say color equals color or magenta. And people have asked about this before. So there's nothing that prevents us. Again, it's the same JavaScript of putting our color in here to get the method that we want to call. Again, everything in JavaScript is an object. So chalk is an object, and chalk has this color method, which I'm calling. And so if I ran this, it would be in magenta. But I could come over here and say hello in green, or in red, or in blue. Okay. So the point that I want to make here is that you have the ability to bring in other packages. Again, these are external packages, but we could also have internal packages as well. These end up getting installed here under our node modules, assuming that we store them locally. We've got a package JSON file that's going to end up listing our dependencies. And we're going to get very comfortable with this file. So let me take a little break here. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how the module system works. Let me get the right window open here.